Did you know that you can't actually see the Great Wall of China from space? But this is only one of many common misconceptions people have about this ancient structure. And if you thought the truth would set you free, well, think again. Because when it comes to the Great Wall of China, there are plenty of legends that have been woven into its foundations over the years. Let's take a closer look at some of them today. First, let's address that claim that you can see the wall from space. It was first reported in the 19th century by British writer Lord Macartney, who visited Beijing in 1816. He said that he could see the wall from the grounds of the Summer Palace, and that's where the myth took off. However, despite being repeated ad nauseum since then, nobody has ever actually been able to verify Macartney's claim. The great irony here being that the Great Wall of China is named as such because it was thought to be the greatest construction project the world had ever seen. Nowadays, it's considered more of an eyesore than anything else. In fact, it was never even meant to be so long. In total, including all of its different sections built over the centuries, it measures around 21,000 kilometers long. That's longer than the entire circumference of the Earth. But that length is only due to the fact that it was continuously worked on for hundreds of years. If you take the longest continuous section, which is the one built during the Ming Dynasty, it measures just under 9,000 kilometers, so not even half of what the wall is long today. What's even more interesting, though, is that it was never intended to go all the way around China. Instead, it was built strategically around key parts of the country's borders to protect against nomadic invaders from the north and northwest. Sometimes it would follow a mountain range or river, making use of natural barriers. Other times it would wind its way through plains and flatlands, forming a sort of rough circle around the most important cities. And while we're talking about things that aren't true, let's debunk another popular myth. The Great Wall wasn't built all at once. In fact, it was built and rebuilt multiple times, starting all the way back in the 7th century BC. Back then, China was made up of several different states, and they were constantly at war with each other. So it only makes sense that the first walls were built as a way to defend one state from the others. These early walls weren't made from stone or brick like the later ones, but from simple things like wood and earth. During the spring and autumn period, the state of Jin constructed a series of defensive fortifications along its border with the state of Zhao. Some of these fortifications date as far back as 446 BC later. The state of Qin united most of China under its rule, and in doing so, extended the Great Wall even further west to the edge of the Tarim Basin. Then came the Han Dynasty, which lasted from 206 BC to 220 AD. The Jianyu people were a confederation of nomadic tribes in the steppes of modern-day Mongolia and northern China. They had been a thorn in the side of the Chinese states for centuries, and now they were giving the Han a hard time too. To counter their attacks, Emperor Wu of Han ordered the extension of the wall further north, as well as the creation of watchtowers and signal stations to warn of impending attacks. This section of the wall still stands in places, and you can even visit some of the watchtowers. One of them is the famous Mai, also known as the Cloud Ladder. It got its nickname because it looks like it might have been used by the mythical Chinese emperor who ascended to heaven. But alas, it's just a practical solution to a logistical problem. You see, the reason why the wall was built in this way is because the vast majority of troops stationed on the wall were infantry. While cavalry was useful for scouting missions and harassing the enemy, they couldn't really fight in large numbers because there simply wasn't enough room to maneuver. The same goes for archers, who needed to be close to the wall to get a good angle on their targets. That's why the main fighting force of the army stationed on the wall was infantry armed with spears, swords, and bows and arrows. This isn't exactly a very exciting weapon arsenal, but it was effective. After all, the primary purpose of the wall was defense. Cavalry charges and arrow volleys could be useful deterrents. But the main idea was that the sheer length of the wall would prevent any invading army from getting too close to Chinese territory in the first place. If they did manage to sneak past the defenses, however, then things could get a bit dicey. The next dynasty to work on the wall was the Sui. They ruled from 581 to 618, and during that time they rebuilt much of the wall that had been damaged over the centuries. But it was the Tang dynasty that followed who really expanded the wall. The Tang were in power from 618 to 907, and it was during their reign that the wall reached its greatest extent to the east. They added over 2,500 miles to the length of the wall during that time. But after the temps fell and the 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms period followed, the wall started falling into disrepair. Then came the Song dynasty, which lasted from 960 to 1279. During the Song's reign, China saw a huge increase in trade with the outside world, particularly with the Middle East and Europe. This was thanks in part to the invention of paper money and the magnetic compass. Because of this, the government didn't feel threatened by nomadic tribes as much anymore, and they neglected the wall. Instead, they poured all their resources into building up their navy to protect their growing trade interests overseas. The Song were eventually overthrown by Kublai Khan and his Mongol army in 1279, but it didn't last for long. After him, China fell into another period of division. This time, it was split between various warlords and local rulers, one of whom was a guy named Hongwu. He managed to unite most of China under his rule and established the Ming dynasty in 1368, unlike the previous dynasties. The Ming had no interest in expanding China's borders. In fact, they wanted to do the exact opposite. They spent the next 3 centuries building up the Great Wall to keep out any potential invaders. They extended it over 2,100 miles, mostly on the eastern side, and reinforced the existing fortifications. It was during the Ming dynasty that the wall reached its current length. It was also during this time that the wall became more than just a simple barrier. The Ming added watchtowers, barracks, and other buildings to the wall so that it could function as a proper defensive structure. They also planted trees along the top of the wall so that soldiers could hide from enemy fire. Of course, those soldiers still had to keep an eye on the path below them. So instead of planting tall trees that could block their vision, they planted a type of tree that stayed short and stunted, namely the Chinese pine. Today, you can still find these trees along sections of the wall, and if you ever visit, make sure to look out for them. However, the Ming dynasty came to an end in 1644, when a group of rebels captured Beijing. Over the next few decades, China fell under the rule of the Qing dynasty. Like the Ming before them, the Qing didn't really feel threatened by nomadic tribes, so they didn't bother much with the wall. Instead, they focused on building up China's infrastructure and economy. These days, the wall is mostly seen as a tourist attraction. Every year, millions of people visit the wall to take in its grandeur and snap some Instagram-worthy pics. And while the wall is certainly impressive, it's important to remember that it's not quite what it was once cracked up to be. For one thing, it wasn't built all at once. As we've already mentioned, it was built and rebuilt many times over the course of centuries. This means that there isn't one uniform style to the wall. Instead, it's a mishmash of different architectural styles, which can be a bit jarring at times. For example, the Ming dynasty section of the wall is made from brick, while the older sections are made from stone and dirt. The wall was never meant to be a single continuous structure either. Instead, it was built in sections with gaps in between them. These gaps were usually filled in with natural barriers like rivers and mountains. The idea was that the wall would be used as a guideline for troops to follow when retreating from an enemy attack. The thinking was that an open field was much easier to defend than a forest or mountainous region. The wall wasn't always the same height either, varied depending on the terrain and the level of threat. In areas where there was little risk of attack, the wall was only a few feet high. But in more dangerous areas, it was as much as 30 feet high. Finally, the wall was never really finished. There were always sections of it that were in need of repair or rebuilding. This was partly because the wall was never really finished. Even the Ming dynasty, who spent hundreds of years working on the wall, never completed it. There were always sections of it that were in need of repair or rebuilding. This is partly because the wall was constantly being attacked by nomadic tribes. These tribes would often target the weakest sections of the wall, which were usually near the top, where soldiers were stationed. When the soldiers were killed or the wall was breached, it was up to local officials to repair the damage. Fortunately, these officials were often corrupt and would use shoddy materials to patch up the wall. All of this is to say that the Great Wall of China is not the mighty, impenetrable structure that legend has made it out to be. But does that make it any less impressive? Yes. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to stay tuned for more videos like this one. Thanks for watching.